good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is there, but welcome to the MyCom Podcast. I'm John Watson, and Darby Jones is here, and we've got a guest today, Brett McArdle. Welcome, Brett.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
We're glad to have you, man. Brett is the content and branding developer at United Methodist Communications, and we are going to talk about a new tool that UMCOM offers for free that you are going to want to go check out immediately. The Church Marketing Plan tool can be found at umcom.org/marketing-plan. Marketing plan with a dash in there. So umcom.org/marketing-plan. Now, this is a retooling of something that UMCOM has had around for a while, right, Brett?
That is correct. We had it in a previous version for a while, for a number of years, and it just needed some reworking and some streamlining.
Mm-hmm.
And so we looked at how we could make it faster, more even visually appealing on the website, and making sure that churches could use it quickly compared to its previous state and automate as many steps as we could.
So this tool is for senior pastors, for communications staff, even volunteers. Like, this is something that no matter your position at the church, if you are tasked with or care about any of the communications or the marketing or whatever, this is something for you, something you're going to want to look at. And it might be something that you need to take to somebody else at the church and kind of champion that and say, hey, we really need to do this, or take pieces of it and implement them. But this is something every church should go through, in my opinion. When I went through it again recently in preparing for this episode, I was just kind of re-astonished at how simple and plain, the plain language is so helpful, and the path through it is so linear and useful that I really think every church can actually apply this. So I'm excited to talk about it today. But let's talk a little bit about why have a church marketing plan? What need is there for that? A lot of churches kind of just shoot from the hip on this, right?
Yeah, there's, I think, a need for a lot of churches in terms of communications to be able to reach their communities as effectively as possible through a variety of media. We're talking about everything from their bulletins to their social media presence, their website, all other forms of communications. And marketing gets a bad rap as kind of a dirty word. We're really speaking about how you reach your community and expand your presence in the community. And I tend to think that the church is speaking about God's love. If you were thinking of that as a product, there is no better product, and therefore doesn't that deserve a say in the marketplace of our lives? So I think that's a critical need for churches to be able to speak to what they're offering their communities and just how vital and powerful the presence of a church can be and how wonderful it can be in their area.
Absolutely. I think of marketing a little bit like plumbing. A lot of people look at the pipes under their sink and the pipes to their toilet and stuff and think, well, if something goes wrong, I can just go ahead and fix that. It's not a big deal. I'll figure it's just pipes, right? Plumbing is a complex trade. It's a whole industry with complicated training and a lot of special thought processes that go into that we're not aware of, those of us who are not plumbers. And marketing is kind of the same way. A lot of people look at communications work and think, well, I've got Microsoft Word and Microsoft Paint. I can knock this out. It's no problem. Well, you're not necessarily wrong, but we need to understand that there's an established industry and established best practices for a reason. Because if we want to do it well, we can't fly by the seat of our pants. We have to bring a measure of intentionality to what we're doing. So having a plan in place, a tried and true, proven, effective strategy for navigating the waters of marketing your church will help ensure that your plumbing doesn't spring leaks after you're done.
Yeah, and to your point about there are best practices, we get into a really good sense of some riverbanks within which churches can operate that gives them a tried and true framework, but still a great deal of latitude in terms of the steps involved. And I think back to, in previous jobs, I've been both a client and an advertiser, and I've seen advertising agencies sometimes think of their creative processes when they pitch to new accounts as if they are somehow, holding these holy documents that are their strategies for how they're going to help an account. It's not that way. I've been on both sides of the fence. It is not some extraordinary document or some amazing magic plan. It literally falls into about two categories: your background research and then the strategy you develop. And so we're trying to, with this tool, kind of demystify and democratize the entire process, but still offer some really useful best practices that are going to help churches of a variety of sizes and in a variety of settings.
That's awesome. It's so necessary. I've been in marketing for a decade now, and in all of that time, you're right, there's this haze of mystery and almost superiority around so much of the resources and processes that they try to make it sound like they haven't just reinvented the wheel. But in reality, like you said, it really is as simple as do your research, make a strategy, and break down those two phases into kind of some subsections. And that's what they all are. That's what all the marketing plan tools out there are. And you can pay thousands of dollars to have an expert consultant come in and basically give you what MyCom has now published for free and invited you to just download and use as you will. So that's pretty fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about a typical marketing plan. You mentioned those two sections. Can we dive in a little bit more on what sort of things we would normally expect a marketing plan to cover in general?
Sure. In terms of research, you're going to be looking at a few different, steps that you can take. And for the purposes of the church marketing plan tool, again, we break it into two main phases, the research and strategy. With the research part, we tried to speak to a lot of the, the automation or ease of use early on, because we know that churches can very easily look at a marketing plan or a strategy and their eyes glaze over and think, oh gosh, this is going to be terribly time intensive.
Right.
Well, no, we're trying to make this easier than it's ever been before. A couple of the things that we offer are literally forms, very brief forms you would fill out online, and we get back to you with information that you can use as part of the research phase of your plan. In terms of, there's a site we recommend called umdata.org. You can go there and find out some numbers regarding your church that you may not have noticed before. We also have an online survey we can give people, and they can actually make adjustments to that survey that we've built already, send their adjustments to us, we do the heavy lifting, and send it back to you and say, it's ready for you to use.
So you're saying not only did you publish a free tool that is thorough and helpful, but you're also volunteering some of the work for United Methodist Churches to do some of that demographic information and reporting.
Absolutely.
That's insane.
Yeah, and then also another automated step is when they request what we call a community profile. That's another one of the pages on here. They can fill out the form,
Right.
and they will receive a community profile that gets into everything from the educational levels of folks in their community to income levels to population trends, and even such things as the tendencies in terms of charitable giving that people show in their community. So you find some really useful insights about how your church can do ministry going forward based on the character of the area you live in.
Wow.
And you can also use that demographic information when targeting people on Facebook if you're doing Facebook ads.
Right.
Yes.
That's really helpful. So generally in that research phase of any given marketing plan, we're going to be looking at who the target market is, what the demographic information is around that, what the perception of your brand is, so that kind of brand positioning idea, competitive analysis, quote unquote, in the secular marketing world. For us, what that would mean is kind of looking at what other churches are around you and what's their messaging and how are they positioned, what's their brand positioning. Your marketing strategy then is kind of the next big step, right, where you actually take that information and go, okay, now what? How are my boots going to hit the pavement here?
Exactly, and that's where, with the research, you do some background stuff, and then with the strategy, what we're ultimately pushing people towards is a one-day marketing retreat for their church. And within that, we offer, we provide a general framework, but we want them to interpret it and run that retreat. And it may be, less than a day even. Maybe just a handful of hours, who knows? It just depends on what they need. But within that strategy process, they're going to go through things like defining what an actual strategy statement can say,
Right.
what the goals are within that strategy, and then the tactics, the step-by-step things to get those done. Then we also have downloadable documents like a resource allocation chart where they can put some real numbers to, okay, here's what we can place towards this goal in terms of manpower or facilities or money. We also have a master planning chart. We also give a few tips on how to kind of reveal your actual plan to your congregation so they can see the fruits of your labor and get on board as well. So it's, again, we're trying to make this a quicker process than you may have thought possible.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think we need that, bringing down the level of complexity for implementing something that's so impactful as a marketing plan. A good marketing plan is insanely valuable. And right at the outset of this tool, you recommend a team to be assembled from the church. Can you tell us a little bit about what sort of people you're going to want on this team and why?
Yes, in fact, we speak to having your pastor, a staff or a lay leader who we would term the marketing plan coordinator. We also mention if you have a administrative assistant, and then your trustees or members of a committee. And I also thought about this from the point of view of having attended some small churches here in the Nashville area, thinking about small staff churches. Even with that number of people who I just mentioned, could you even go smaller if you need to based on a really small staff? I think realistically, you probably need about 4 people to be that team between the pastor, the marketing plan coordinator, the administrative assistant. And if you just had maybe one representative from your trustees or a committee or something like that, that at least gives you enough people in a room such that when you have that retreat, you've got some heads together who can collaborate in that one day and come forward with your finished document.
Yeah. So with the trustees and members of committees, things like that, what you're looking for is a stakeholder, right?
Yes.
You're looking for somebody who's saying, I have a vested interest in the outcome of this meeting, of this strategy, this tool. And the senior pastor, the idea is somebody to guide the message, which is so important to a marketing plan, is what's the thing that you're communicating out there? What's that, we talk about it a lot in this podcast. It's kind of the beating heart of your church that you want to get out into that community and bless that community with. And really, the pastors are going to be the ones who hold the keys, for lack of a better phrase, the ones who get that. They're your vision casters for the church body. And then with the marketing plan coordinator and admin assistant, it sounds like those are possibly lay or even volunteer. That's the same thing. I don't know why I said or even, but you know what I mean? Like that sounds like that can be people from your congregation and not necessarily full-time jobs, right?
They are, that's correct. Because again, I came from the perspective of thinking, what if you've got a handful of people or even less?
Right.
What is the smallest number you can use and really make this still happen? So yes, a lay person, a lay leader or staff, because that marketing plan coordinator is going to be taking, I think an important communications role and recording role where they're making sure that the essence of what you're getting at for your plan gets faithfully placed into the finished document.
So when I was at General Conference 2016, I met countless pastors of small to medium-sized rural churches, and they're the guy or the gal. They're the ones who do all the things, right? Which is just a reality for so many rural churches. In that scenario, would it be plausible for that one pastor to kind of run the show and grab 3 other people with energy from the congregation just for the sake of having, like you said, having the heads together, just for accountability and bouncing things off of each other in the brainstorming process? Do you think that could work for that church?
I think it can. And what I mentioned before is probably your optimal sort of situation.
Right.
But if you, again, with a number of the kind of automated steps that go into this, and the fact that some of we have some downloadable worksheets, those are meant to be done solo. You don't need to get into a room, into a committee setting. You're looking at the research you've got, the community profile, your church profile, things of that nature, and basing your thoughts that you will jot down in those worksheets off of that research. So you don't have to have a large meeting to come up with those answers. You do that in the comfort of your own home, in your fuzzy slippers and with your latte nearby, and bring that to your eventual retreat so that when you're ready to have those conversations, you've already got your recorded thoughts, and those conversations become, I think, much more useful because you've already put a lot of your ideas on paper, and then they can spring forward from there in a group setting.
We're big proponents here of good meetings, of walking into meetings prepared, having done some legwork, some groundwork that means you've got something to chew on, something to launch off of right away, and then going into meetings with an outcome in mind. And I think this marketing plan tool gives us a framework for that big church marketing retreat or kind of half-day meeting idea, so that we can operate in those, come with all of this stuff done and actually be able to utilize that time well, to just take it captive for a purpose.
Yeah, and one of the things with those downloadable worksheets is also the fact that it's going to call on you to use your imagination as well. That's, I think, perhaps a underappreciated part of it, because it's going to ask you things like, what do you perceive the strengths of your church to be? What do you want your church to be like in 5 years? Yes, you can pull some of that from those research elements, but also you're going to be thinking, what do I want this to actually accomplish? Right. And, your imagination plays a very big role in that. So this is not some sort of terribly scholarly thing. This is about, dreaming and figuring out how to make those dreams become communications realities.
Right. One thing I've noticed, I noticed this in the plan, the amount of anecdotal evidence, so to speak, when doing the research in your church and in your community. The fact that we should go out and just ask people to hear their perspective and count that as marketing data. And there's often in marketing a sense of everything has to be large statistical representation. You know what I mean? Like everything's a little bit cold and distant and impersonal. And in reality, anecdotal evidence is really important, in my view, because the people who can clearly articulate their view on a thing tend to be the people who are just better at verbalizing what everyone else is thinking.
Yep.
And so anecdotal evidence can actually be a really good way to take the pulse of a community or a congregation.
There's two steps in particular that you're obliquely referencing that are part of the research phase. One has to do with simply doing some basic Q&A with small groups in your church.
Yeah.
Having someone who's part of your marketing team go and take literally no more than 15 to 20 minutes of their time on a Sunday in a small group and asking the group a few questions, jotting down their responses. That's not some sort of an online survey. That's a face-to-face,
right.
I'm in the room and I'm not going to take a whole lot of your time sort of survey, but it's enough to where you can get some really good personal stories from people that really speak to the life of your church and how it's impacted those individuals. The other step is what we call the community leader gathering, which is that's an optional step having to do with, it depends really kind of on the size of your community and how easy it would be for your church to pull off logistically, where you literally invite folks from whether it's government or the educational sector or retail or just whatever into your church for a luncheon or a breakfast sometime,
right.
and just host them and talk to them about what your church is wanting to accomplish, but also kind of take their temperature. What do they know of your church? And that's more anecdotal evidence. Between those Q&As, those brief ones, brief interviews with your small groups, and then a community leaders gathering, those are two great anecdotal reservoirs just waiting to be tapped.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my opinion, this reminds me of our community listening episode that we did, right? You remember that, Darby?
Yeah.
With that church in Indianapolis with the roving listener. It's honoring, it's dignifying to the church and to the community to ask how they feel about things. Mm-hmm. It communicates to the church, our thoughts, our feelings on these things matter to the leadership, which builds trust, which is just a healthy place to be. So it might feel like you're I'm sorry to take your time, I just need 50. But what you're really doing when you survey somebody like that is honoring them and saying your voice matters. And I think in the community, the same thing is true. We don't want to be seen as opposed to community. We want to be seen, our churches want to be bastions of love and hope in the community, reaching out, not barricading themselves off. And so when we step out in some way into that community and say, how do you feel about this? It's just a good thing. That's breaking down walls right there. I love that. I'm glad that part is in the marketing plan tool. It's important.
And if you have a hard time getting a survey out digitally, or if you have a small congregation and you need to survey the community, you could hire some people to just go out and walk the streets and
Sure.
ask their neighbors, what can you offer the community and what are your needs and what can we pray for you? And it's just a great way to get to know the people around you.
Absolutely. Kind of those guerrilla tactics are really useful. I think the key for making them useful, though, is to record. I don't mean audio, but I mean, if you have 3 volunteers walking around a neighborhood and just chatting with people and whatever, have them be asking specific things and then have them write down the answers once they leave the conversation. That way you can actually track it, look at it all together, start to see 19 people said the same thing. That's remarkable, in ways that you wouldn't be able to if you were just having the conversations and then trying to remember what everybody's been saying and piece it all together in that way.
Yeah, that's what you're looking for, is commonalities there. Some undercurrents that end up either, maybe they bolster what you're learning through an online survey, or maybe they run counter to it. But the fact is, if you can find those personal anecdotes, those actual stories that people really relate to you, like you said, they're a gold mine waiting to happen.
So, Brett, what's the time commitment for the marketing plan coordinator, or the person who takes that role on? What's the time commitment that we're looking at for them to get through this thing from start to finish?
Yeah, I would say we're looking at a handful of weeks, and the good thing is with the research phase, there are a number of parts of this that are automated.
Yeah.
You fill out a form, send it to us, we do some heavy lifting for you, send it back. With the Q&As, with the community gathering, some of that stuff is optional, depending upon your needs or your manpower, your capabilities, all that sort of stuff. And then, of course, on the back end with the strategy, again, you'll have that retreat. But we brought this down in terms of, in a good way. It used to be significantly longer, but we figured out, okay, we've got to make this a faster process to make it really helpful for churches that don't have a tremendous staff. So again, a handful of weeks, and culminating with that 1 day or several hour long retreat.
But you got to get it out there and let the community in your church over time make it better.
Yeah, for sure.
And so you don't have to be an expert from the start, but this plan will get you excited and get the momentum going. And over time, you can learn more aspects of marketing and really fine tune it.
Absolutely. But we were having a conversation before recording this episode about just that we really just want people to use this thing in any way. That if they take, if churches out there take a bit of it piecemeal and download it, one of the tools, one of the spreadsheets, or just fill out the demographic report or something like that, that's great. This is for you. This isn't about MyCom getting its numbers high. This is for the churches, because we actually think it's beneficial. We actually want the heart of your church to be communicated well into the community. So definitely take advantage of it and look through the tool. You don't have to even sign up or do anything special to check it out. You can go all the way through it. And when you get to the end, in my opinion, the crown jewel of this thing is the church marketing plan tool. It's a spreadsheet. Now, I'm biased. I do love spreadsheets. But this is a simple spreadsheet, and it is the most helpful step-by-step way to take your big picture ideas, these abstract things we've talked about, and put them in concrete plans with a result of Brett will do a Facebook advertising campaign with this messaging and this budget for this duration for this target market. Really drive it down into the nitty-gritty. I love that thing. I downloaded it. I'm going to hang on to it and use it for, even for my church. And I definitely recommend that you work through the tool and check that thing out at the end.
And the funny thing is, you said you like spreadsheets. I actually don't. And so I tend to run from them. So for me, it was a question of how do I make this as simple as possible? Because if my tendency is to look at a spreadsheet and my eyes glaze over, I want to find the fastest through line from point A to point B.
Yep.
That was what it was. And like you just said, it just takes you through quick steps. And you insert the information into the cells, and there is your document that shows the culmination of your work.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there was one more automated process that we haven't mentioned. Doesn't it offer some branding and logo services, or is that another service that we do?
That's another, and yet it is to a certain extent it can be a companion piece whereby we do offer a logo and branding service which is paid for through World Service dollars, and all a church has to do is reach out to us. We have it on our website on umcom.org, and you simply go in there, send it to brand@umcom.org, send a request, and we can prepare a mock-up of a branded logo that your church may wish to use for printed or online materials. So that can be one of those things where when you come to a realization that, we could use some branding, reach out to us. We can provide that service.
I'll provide that in the description, and maybe we could even add that to the marketing plan tool in some way. I don't know where it would fit, but something to think about.
And the tool is an evolving thing. As we learn more about churches' usages of it, we can make adjustments to make it even more streamlined and faster.
Yeah.
Right on. Man, thanks for your work on this.
Sure,
and
my pleasure.
we're glad to have had you here today for this episode. Again, this tool is worth your time to check out. So please visit umcom.org/marketing-plan and check it out. It's free. So you've got nothing to lose. So in the next episode that we're going to record, we've got a treat for you. We're going to introduce you to Dan Wunderlich, who is going to be the new host of the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast. Dan's a UMC Extension Minister, and he's got a great current podcast called The Art of the Sermon that you should definitely give a listen to. It's at defininggrace.com/art of the sermon. Defininggrace.com is just a great website with resources and ideas on church marketing. This guy, Dan, knows what he's doing here. So we're really excited to get to know him in the next episode a little bit. We're gonna talk, get to know him, kind of think of his philosophy for church communications. So please make sure to tune in and join us there, and we'll see you next time.